For 52 days, investigators have been searching for answers. 52 days since Nancy Guthrie vanished from her Tucson home in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026. Everyone assumed they knew what happened. A violent struggle, an attack, chaos inside that house. But new evidence reveals something completely different. The blood evidence inside Nancy Guthrie's home tells a story no one expected. Not a story of violence and chaos. A story of something far more disturbing. Control, precision, deliberate movement, and the location where investigators found that blood changes everything we thought we knew about the 16 minutes between when Nancy's doorbell camera went dark and when her pacemaker sent its final signal. Blood was discovered inside Nancy Guthrie's home, not scattered across multiple rooms. Not in the bedroom where Savannah Guthrie said her mother was taken from her bed in the dark of night. Not in the kitchen or living room. In one very specific location that reveals exactly how Nancy was taken from her home. A blood spatter expert who has testified in 7 states and federal court has analyzed this evidence. What he discovered challenges the assumptions that have shaped this investigation from the beginning. His conclusions suggest this was not what it appeared to be. This was planned. This was methodical. And the person who did this knew exactly what they were doing. This video is based on publicly available information, expert analysis, investigative reporting by Ashley Banfield of News Nation, and official statements. All individuals are innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Some elements discussed are expert interpretations of physical evidence and investigative possibilities. Who is Nancy Guthrie? Nancy Ainer Guthrie was born on June 24, 1941, in Tucson, Arizona. For 84 years, she lived independently in the community she loved. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. But to those who knew her in Tucson, Nancy was defined by her own life. Her sharp mind, her independence, her fierce love of privacy. At 84, she lived alone in her home on East Calle Tumacacori in the Catalina foothills. She drove herself to appointments. She managed her own life. Her family described her as mentally sharp. Mom would never have just wandered off. On the night of January 31st, 2026, Nancy's son-in-law Tommaso dropped her off at her home around 10 p.m. after a family gathering. She walked to her front door, unlocked it, stepped inside, went to bed. Hours later, she was gone. By 5:52 a.m. on February 1st, friends couldn't reach her. The family arrived to find blood on the front porch, a disabled doorbell camera, and footage of a masked figure who had approached in the darkness. For weeks, the focus has been on that blood outside Nancy's home, the droplets leading down her front walkway, the questions about what they meant. But there was always one piece of information that remained hidden, one detail that investigators knew but the public did not. The blood didn't start outside, it started inside. Before we dive into what this revelation means and how it changes our understanding of what happened to Nancy, if you want to follow every development in this case, subscribe to Crime Uncovered and turn on notifications. We investigate the details that change everything, the evidence that tells the real story, the expert analysis that breaks cases open. Because in this case, where the blood was found inside Nancy's home changes everything. Now, let's talk about what has been discovered. Since February 1st, 2026, one question has haunted this investigation. What happened inside Nancy Guthrie's home? We know a masked figure approached her doorbell camera at 1:47 a.m. We know the camera went dark. We know motion was detected inside the house at 2:12 a.m. We know Nancy's pacemaker sent its final signal at 2:28 a.m., 16 minutes. That's the window. But what happened during those 16 minutes? Where in the house did this begin? How was Nancy moved from her bed to the front door? The assumption has always been violence. A struggle in the bedroom. Nancy fighting back. The perpetrator overpowering her. Chaos and force. The blood evidence tells a completely different story. According to investigative reporting by Ashley Banfield of News Nation, who has developed sources close to the investigation, Blood was found inside Nancy Guthrie's home, not in the bedroom, not in the hallway leading from the bedroom, not in multiple rooms suggesting a chase or struggle. In one location, the front entrance hallway, the area just inside the front door. And the pattern of blood inside the house is identical to the pattern outside. The same vertical droplets, the same undisturbed appearance, the same characteristics. The blood begins inside the front entrance. It continues over the threshold of the front door. And it leads down the front walkway before stopping at a point consistent with where a vehicle would be parked. This is the first time this information has been made public, and it raises immediate questions. If Nancy was attacked in her bedroom, why is there no blood in the bedroom? If she was dragged through the house, why is there no blood trail from the bedroom to the front entrance? If there was a violent struggle, why are the blood droplets undisturbed and vertical? To answer these questions, Ashley Banfield consulted Dr. Peter Valentin, an associate professor and department chair of forensic science at the University of New Haven. Dr. Valentin has testified as a blood stain pattern expert in 7 states and federal court. What he discovered in analyzing this evidence is both revealing and disturbing, and the blood pattern inside and outside Nancy's home tells the story of the 16 minutes that changed everything. Dr. Valentin identified the blood as drip stains, blood falling from a source purely by gravity, with no force or energy involved. Not blood from a violent impact, not blood sprayed during a struggle, blood dripping. And that distinction matters. Here's what vertical, undisturbed drip stains tell investigators. This was slow. This was controlled. This was deliberate. If someone is running, the blood droplets stretch and show direction. If someone is being dragged, the droplets smear. If there's a fight, the pattern shows disruption, footprints through the blood, smears where people moved. None of that exists here. The droplets are circular, which means the source was directly overhead and moving slowly enough to maintain that vertical fall. The droplets are undisturbed, which means no one stepped through them, no one fought over them, no one disrupted them. Most significantly, some of the droplets show what Dr. Valentin identified as satellite spatter, tiny secondary droplets created when blood falls into blood that's already on the surface. This happens when the source of blood remains stationary long enough for multiple drops to fall in the same location. One drop lands, then another drop falls into that first drop, creating a small splash. Tiny droplets radiate outward. The presence of satellite spatter means something critical. Nancy, or whoever was carrying her, stopped at that threshold for what Dr. Valentin called a not insignificant amount of time. Not passing through quickly, not rushing, stopped. Something happened at that threshold that required time, opening the heavy front door, adjusting position, preparing for the next phase of the abduction. And during that pause, blood dripped and accumulated. Think about what this reveals. The person who took Nancy wasn't panicking. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't making mistakes. He was in control. Now, we need to address a question that has been debated extensively. Is this blood from Nancy herself, or from an object with her blood on it? Some have suggested the perpetrator used a weapon, and the blood dripping was from that weapon rather than from Nancy directly. Dr. Valentin's analysis rules this out. Here's why. When blood is on an object being carried, not the amount available to drip decreases over time. The object has a finite amount of blood. As drops fall, there's less remaining. The spacing between drops increases because there simply isn't enough blood to maintain the same drip rate. But the pattern inside Nancy's house and outside shows consistency. The droplets don't show increasing spacing. They show what you'd expect from an active source. A person who is bleeding, not an object with blood on it. The volume observed across 2 distinct patterns, one inside, one outside, indicates this is Nancy's blood dripping from Nancy. Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed the blood is Nancy's. DNA testing verified this. The question was never whose blood it is. The question has always been, what does this pattern tell us about what happened? And here's where Dr. Valentin's expertise becomes critical. For blood to fall in vertical droplets and create circular stains, There must be a clear path from the source to the ground. The blood can't be absorbed by clothing or blocked by obstruction. It needs to drip freely. If Nancy was bleeding from her head or face, that area would need to be positioned so blood could fall straight down. The circular shape of the droplets confirms the source was directly overhead. Now think about how that happens. If Nancy was walking upright under her own power, her head would be over her feet. Blood from her face would drip straight down to the floor beneath her. But we know from the doorbell footage that a masked figure approached Nancy's home. We know from Savannah's statement that Nancy was taken from her bed in the dark of night. We know motion was detected inside the house, so suggesting someone moving through the interior. This wasn't Nancy walking voluntarily. This was Nancy being taken. So how was she carried in a way that would create this blood pattern? Ashley Banfield developed a theory based on the evidence. She believes Nancy was carried over the perpetrator's shoulder. In that position, her head and upper body would hang down behind him. If she was bleeding from her face or head, blood would drip straight down behind him as he walked. The pattern would be vertical. It would fall in the path he was walking. It wouldn't be disturbed by his feet because he's walking forward and the blood is falling behind him. When he reached the threshold of the front door, he stopped. He needed to manage the heavy door, opening it while carrying an 84-year-old woman. During that pause, our blood continued to drip in one location, creating the satellite spatter. When he adjusted position to step through the doorway, Nancy's body may have shifted against his shoulder. If her diaphragm was compressed, it could have caused a slight expulsion of blood, creating that one area that looks different from the rest of the drip pattern. Dr. Valentin was asked directly about this theory. His response, "I think it's as plausible as anything else I've heard up to this point," and he added something that could be critical for this investigation. If Nancy was carried over someone's shoulder with her head or upper body positioned where blood could drip, that blood would have landed on the perpetrator's back. Think about that for a moment. When people commit crimes and try to clean up afterward, they focus on what they can see. The front of their pants, the front of their shirt, their hands, their shoes. They don't think about their back. They can't see it. They don't realize blood has soaked into the fabric between their shoulder blades. If this theory is correct, there is blood evidence on the back of the perpetrator's clothing that he may never have thought to clean. And that evidence is still out there, on a jacket hanging in a closet, on a shirt buried in a hamper, on clothing that was thrown away but could still be recovered. This is the kind of detail that solves cases. The evidence the perpetrator didn't know to destroy. But here's the question that immediately follows. If Nancy was attacked in her bedroom, why does the blood only appear in the front entrance? Dr. Valentin explained that this is actually a common misconception in forensic investigations. Investigators see blood in one location and assume that's where the attack occurred. But blood doesn't always begin dripping immediately after an injury. Blood takes time to accumulate. Time to reach the surface of skin or penetrate clothing. Time to flow enough to drip. Think about your own experience with injuries. Sometimes there's a delay between when you're hurt and when you see blood. A cut on your finger might not bleed for several seconds. A deeper wound might bleed internally before it reaches the surface. The same principle applies here. Nancy could have been injured in her bedroom. The blood could have been absorbed by her clothing or hair initially. As she was carried through the house, the blood accumulated. By the time she reached the front entrance, it had accumulated enough to begin dripping. This actually makes the timeline more disturbing. It suggests Nancy was controlled in her bedroom without leaving visible blood evidence. She was moved through her house, past her kitchen, through her hallway, without dripping blood. Only at the front entrance did the blood flow reach the point where it began to drip. That level of control is not accidental. That's not a crime of passion. That's not someone who broke in impulsively and panicked. That's someone who knew what they were doing. According to Banfield's sources, when the first deputies arrived at Nancy's home on the morning of February 1st, they initially believed they were responding to a missing elderly woman. Perhaps she had wandered away. Perhaps she had become confused. But when more experienced investigators arrived, they immediately recognized this was something far more serious. They saw the back door standing wide open, not just unlocked, wide open. Nancy's family had told investigators that she routinely left her back doors unlocked. In Tucson's Catalina foothills, many residents feel safe enough to do this. But there's a difference between unlocked and wide open. Unlocked means the door is closed but not secured. You'd have to try the handle to know it was unlocked. Wide open means the door is standing open, visible to anyone who enters the house. When investigators entered through Nancy's front door, they could see straight through to the back of the house. A door to the back patio stood wide open. This tells us about the perpetrator's entry and exit. He likely entered through that unlocked back door. He knew it would be unlocked. He moved through the house to Nancy's bedroom. He controlled her there in a way that didn't immediately create visible blood evidence. He carried her back through the house toward the front entrance. And at some point during that movement, Nancy's injury began bleeding enough to drip. By the front entrance, blood was falling. He stopped at the threshold, managing the door. Blood accumulated. He repositioned, stepped through, and continued down the front walkway. The blood stopped at a point consistent with where a vehicle would be parked. Nancy was placed in that vehicle. The repositioning changed the blood flow, or the injury was covered. The dripping stopped, and Nancy disappeared. The pattern tells this story even without witnesses, and even without surveillance footage of the interior. The physical evidence creates a timeline of movement and control. But it also reveals something investigators may have missed. Dr. Valentin emphasized a point that should concern everyone following this case. You only find the evidence you're looking for. And if you go to your scene with the wrong sense of what your scene is about, you could walk right past the evidence of what actually happened. When investigators first processed Nancy's home, did they understand this was a carefully controlled abduction? Did they process the bedroom looking for subtle signs of how Nancy was subdued? Did they examine surfaces for trace evidence that would reveal how someone moved through the house carrying an 84-year-old woman? Or did they assume this was a violent crime and look for evidence of violence? Overturned furniture, broken items, signs of struggle. The crime scene was released back to the family approximately 30 hours after Nancy disappeared. Dr. Valentin was asked directly whether that was appropriate. His response was unequivocal. I would have held that house for as long as I possibly could. Here's why this matters. In Dr. Valentin's professional experience working as both a forensic scientist and a detective with the Connecticut State Police, he has learned to recognize different types of cases. The Nancy Guthrie case falls into a rare category. This is a case where forensic evidence is leading the investigation. In most criminal investigations, forensic evidence confirms what detectives figure out through witness interviews, suspect identification, and motive analysis. The forensic work runs in parallel, supporting the detective work. But in some cases, Dr. Valentin estimates about 5 to 10%, the forensic evidence is the primary driver. Without it, the investigation has nowhere to go. There are no witnesses, no obvious suspect, no clear motive pointing to a specific person. In those cases, the physical evidence is everything. And when physical evidence is everything, you protect it at all costs. You hold the scene, you process it methodically. You go back multiple times as new questions emerge. The Nancy Guthrie case is one of those 5 to 10%. The physical evidence is the story, and the decision to release the scene after 30 hours may have compromised the ability to tell that story completely. There are specific items that were not collected immediately that could have been critical. The welcome mat at Nancy's front door remained in place for weeks. Journalists photographed it. It was visible to anyone who approached the house. Dr. Valentin described that mat as potentially containing trace evidence that could connect a suspect to the scene. Fibers from a vehicle's carpet, soil from a specific location, microscopic materials from clothing or shoes. Processing a doormat is painstaking work. There would be thousands of pieces of environmental debris to sort through, but within that debris could be the one fiber or soil sample that breaks the case. That mat should have been collected immediately, sealed, and preserved. Instead, it remained exposed to weather, foot traffic, and contamination. The bracket that held Nancy's Nest doorbell camera was also not collected immediately. The perpetrator removed the camera. He touched that bracket. he manipulated it. If he had a bite light in his mouth, his saliva would be on his gloved fingers. That saliva would transfer to the bracket. Investigators eventually collected the bracket, but not until approximately 3 weeks after the crime. By then, DNA evidence may have degraded significantly. These are what Dr. Valentin calls unforced errors, mistakes made under pressure that cannot be undone. The pressure of multiple agencies trying to coordinate, the pressure of intense media attention, the pressure of a high-profile family being involved. All of this creates an environment where investigators feel compelled to show progress. They make decisions quickly rather than methodically, and in Dr. Valentin's experience, that pressure leads to mistakes. Sheriff Nanos was asked early in the investigation whether he would have done anything differently. His response at that time acknowledged regret about releasing the scene. He said, essentially, "Monday morning quarterback, I probably would have held the scene longer. I have faith in my team. If another agency wants to assist, we're an open book." Absolutely. I probably could have held off on that. That's an admission. A recognition that in hindsight the scene was released too soon. But 52 days later, in a recent interview with News 4 Tucson, Sheriff Nanos said something different. "I have no regrets about my team and their efforts. I don't regret we let the crime scene go too soon or any of that." The regret he expressed weeks ago has been replaced with a claim that no mistakes were made. Dr. Valentin didn't comment on this contradiction directly, but his assessment of what happens when cases are handled under intense pressure speaks for itself. Now let's talk about what the blood evidence tells us about Nancy's injury. The volume of blood visible in the photographs is significant, but not massive. This is not a catastrophic injury that would cause death within minutes without emergency intervention. Dr. Valentin was careful in his assessment. This is an injury that requires medical attention, but it's survivable. However, and this is critical, we don't know what other injuries Nancy may have sustained that didn't produce visible external bleeding. We don't know what happened after she was taken from her home. We don't know if she received medical care. The blood pattern tells us about one specific injury that was bleeding at that specific time. It doesn't tell us about the totality of what Nancy experienced. Nancy Guthrie's most recent public statement has indicated the family wants Nancy home so they can give her a place of final rest. This language suggests the family believes Nancy did not survive. But Sheriff Nanos, in his recent interview, made a direct appeal to whoever took Nancy. Just give her up, let her go, take her to a clinic, a hospital, drop her off, just let her go. This appeal suggests Sheriff Nanos believes Nancy might still be alive. These two perspectives represent the painful uncertainty that has defined this case for 52 days. The blood evidence doesn't resolve that uncertainty. What it tells us is that at the moment Nancy was being taken from her home, she had an injury that was bleeding but was not immediately life-threatening. What happened after that moment is a question the blood evidence cannot answer. But there's one more critical piece of information the blood pattern reveals. There is blood in the vehicle that transported Nancy. Dr. Valentin was emphatic about this. The blood trail stops at a point on the walkway. That stopping point is consistent with Nancy being placed into a vehicle, when she was repositioned from being carried to being placed in a seated or lying position. The injury that was dripping either stopped being in a position where blood could fall freely, or someone applied pressure to stop the bleeding. But before that happened, blood was dripping, and some of that blood went into the vehicle. Here's what's critical about that. Blood is extraordinarily difficult to completely remove from a vehicle. Most people, when they try to clean blood, stop when they can no longer see the color red. But the chemical components of blood remain. They're invisible to the naked eye, but they're detectable with specialized forensic reagents designed specifically to find blood that has been cleaned. Even if the perpetrator spent hours scrubbing that vehicle, even if he used bleach and chemical cleaners, there's a very strong likelihood that latent blood evidence would still be detectable. And that blood would be Nancy's. It would place her in that specific vehicle at the time she was bleeding. It would be powerful physical evidence connecting the vehicle, and by extension, the vehicle's owner or regular driver, to the crime. Dr. Valentin's message to investigators: finding that vehicle is critical. The blood evidence tells us it exists. It's out there, and it contains evidence. The FBI has been canvassing Nancy's neighborhood, asking residents for surveillance footage from specific dates. They're building a timeline of vehicles that were in the area. If they identify the vehicle, the forensic testing becomes straightforward. Test for latent blood. Compare DNA to Nancy's. Build the case. But 52 days later, no arrest has been made. No vehicle has been publicly identified. The investigation, by all appearances, has stalled. Dr. Valentin described this as one of those rare cases where everyone is waiting for the forensic evidence to provide direction. Without it, investigators are stuck. And when a case is stuck for 52 days, the likelihood of resolution decreases with each passing day. But there's something else the blood evidence reveals. Something about the person who did this. The pattern of blood, vertical, undisturbed, consistent, tells us this person was calm. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't rushing through the house in a chaotic frenzy. He entered through an unlocked back door. He moved to Nancy's bedroom. He controlled her there in a way that didn't create visible blood evidence. He carried her through the house slowly and deliberately enough that the blood dripping behind him created vertical, circular patterns. He stopped at the front threshold for a significant amount of time, managing the door while Nancy's blood accumulated beneath him. He stepped through, walked down the front walkway with the same slow, controlled pace, and placed her in a vehicle at a calculated location. This is not someone who acts on impulse. This is someone who plans, someone who prepares, someone who understands how to control a situation. The masked figure on the doorbell footage at 1:47 a.m. approached with his right shoulder toward the camera, turning his head to the left. Rick Castigar, who spent 46 years with the Pima County Sheriff's Office, analyzed that footage and said, "That tells me he knew where the camera was. That's not something you figure out in the moment. That's preparatory work. Someone who knows where cameras are located doesn't discover that information during the crime. They discover it during reconnaissance. And if the January 11th date that Google initially confirmed is accurate, that reconnaissance happened 3 weeks before the abduction. 3 weeks to study Nancy's routine. 3 weeks to identify that she left her back doors unlocked. 3 weeks to plan the entry, the control, the extraction. The blood evidence inside Nancy's home confirms what the doorbell footage suggested. This was planned, and the person who planned it understood exactly what he was doing. Now we need to talk about what this means for the family. For 52 days, Nancy Guthrie's family has been living with uncertainty, not knowing if she's alive, not knowing if she suffered, not knowing if they'll ever have answers. The revelation that blood was found inside the front entrance of Nancy's home adds another layer to that suffering, because it confirms that Nancy was injured inside her own home, in the place where she should have been safe. Savannah Guthrie has described her mother as being taken from her bed in the dark of night. That image of an 84-year-old woman being taken from the place she felt most secure has haunted everyone who has followed this case. The blood evidence confirms that image is accurate. Nancy was in her bed. Someone entered her home. Someone moved through her house. Someone carried her to the front door while she bled. And then someone took her away. The family has offered a reward exceeding $1.2 million for information leading to Nancy's safe return. The FBI has assigned a task force to the case. The Pima County Sheriff's Office continues to work it daily. But 52 days later, there are still more questions than answers. The blood evidence inside Nancy's home has answered one question. We now know where Nancy was when she began bleeding visibly. We know the path she took from inside her house to outside. We know the pattern suggests she was carried, not dragged or walking voluntarily. But it hasn't answered the questions that matter most. Where is Nancy now? Who took her? Why? Dr. Valentin said something that should resonate with everyone following this case. In almost every case like this that I've seen, the pressure creates unforced errors, and errors always complicate things. The decision to release the crime scene after 30 hours. The decision not to immediately collect the doormat and camera bracket. The decision to process the scene quickly rather than methodically. These decisions were made under enormous pressure. The pressure of a high-profile case. The pressure of a famous family. The pressure of intense media attention. But those decisions may have compromised the investigation, and 52 days later, we're seeing the consequences. A case that depends on forensic evidence was handled in a way that may have compromised that evidence. And now, the investigation appears to be stuck. Dr. Valentin described his methodology for processing crime scenes. He explained that when you walk into a house, that house tells a story. The story is about how the person who lives there maintains their space. What's normal for them? What's disrupted? The key is recognizing what has changed from the normal state. But you can't identify what's abnormal until you understand what's normal. And the only way to understand what's normal is to process the scene methodically. Walk through every room. Document everything. Let the scene reveal its story rather than imposing assumptions onto the scene. He described it as reading a book. If you skip ahead, you don't understand the characters or the plot. You miss critical details that give later events meaning. The same principle applies to crime scenes. You process methodically. You let the evidence guide you. You don't rush to conclusions. In Nancy's case, did investigators process the bedroom looking for subtle signs of how Nancy was controlled? Did they examine every surface for trace evidence? Did they understand this was a case of control rather than chaos? Or did the pressure to solve the case quickly lead them to miss critical details? We don't know the answer, but Dr. Valentin's concern is that releasing the scene after 30 hours suggests the investigation was driven by pressure rather than methodology. And when pressure drives decisions, evidence gets missed. Opportunities are lost. Cases go unsolved. But while we discuss forensic methodology and investigative decisions, we need to remember something fundamental. Nancy Guthrie is not blood evidence. She's not a forensic case study. She's not a mystery to be solved. She's a mother, a grandmother, a woman who spent 84 years building a life in the community she loved. She had friendships and routines. She had a home where she felt safe. She had a family who loved her. 52 days ago, Nancy was sleeping in her own bed. Within hours, someone would enter her home, take her from that bed, carry her through her house while she bled, and take her away. Her family has spent every one of those 52 days not knowing if she's still alive, not knowing if she suffered, not knowing if they'll ever see her again. Savannah Guthrie continues her work on television every morning, but anyone who watches can see the weight she's carrying, the uncertainty, the grief, the desperate hope for answers. Nancy's grandchildren continue their lives, but they're growing up with a grandmother who vanished, who may never come home. This isn't just a case. This is a family that's been shattered. And every day that passes without answers, that pain deepens. The blood evidence inside Nancy's home tells us part of the story. It tells us where she was when she began bleeding. It tells us how she was moved. It tells us the person who took her was calm, controlled, methodical. But it doesn't tell us where she is. It doesn't tell us if she's still alive. It doesn't tell us who did this or why. Those answers are still out there. In the vehicle that has Nancy's blood in it. In the clothing with blood on the back. In the surveillance footage that may exist. In the mind of the person who walked into Nancy's home that night and destroyed a family. For 52 days, the public focus has been on what we don't know. The mysteries, the theories, the speculation. But now we know something critical. We know where the blood was inside Nancy's home. We know the pattern it created. We know what that pattern reveals about control and planning. That's not the complete answer, but it's part of the truth. And in a case this complex, every piece of truth matters. Every detail brings us closer to understanding what happened. Every revelation creates the possibility that someone, somewhere, will recognize something that leads to Nancy. The blood evidence is part of Nancy's story. A story that deserves to be told completely. A story that deserves resolution. For Nancy, for Savannah, for a family that has waited 52 days for answers they may never receive. If you believe this case deserves resolution, subscribe to Crime Uncovered. Hit that like button if you think Nancy's family deserves answers. And drop a comment. What do you think happened during those 16 minutes between the bedroom and the front door? Because here at Crime Uncovered, we don't accept incomplete investigations. We demand forensic excellence. We fight for families who deserve truth, for Nancy, for justice, for answers.